The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good afternoon. My name is Liza Doran, and I'm a research associate at the Homelessness Research Institute at the National Alliance to End Homelessness. I'd like to welcome all of you to our Rapid ReHousing webinar series. Today we'll be focusing on how to use the Alliance's new Rapid ReHousing Performance and Evaluation Toolkit that was just released last week. The National Alliance to End Homelessness uses data and research, policy, and capacity building to work toward a future without homelessness. Supporting this effort, the Homelessness Research Institute collects and disseminates knowledge of homelessness, policies, and programs to policymakers, practitioners, and the public. Before we get started, just a few housekeeping reminders. All of the lines will be muted during the webinar, but if you have questions at any point, you can send them to us through the webinar software. Please type them into the chat box labeled questions on your webinar control panel. We'll have time at the end of the webinar to answer your questions. We do have many people on the webinar today, so we'll do our best to get to as many of them as we can, but we might not get to all of them. For the questions that we can't answer today, we'll follow up afterwards. Also, please note that a recording of this webinar will be posted on the Alliance's website by tomorrow. To begin our webinar, I'll give you a quick synopsis of the content included in our Rapid ReHousing Performance Evaluation and Improvement Toolkit, which was made available to download on our website last week. Next, Iain de Jong will discuss the three most important outcome metrics for a Rapid ReHousing program to evaluate and how to use these metrics to improve program performance. Then Jerrianne Anthony will discuss how her program, Northern Virginia Family Services, has used performance evaluation to strengthen their Rapid ReHousing program. Finally, we'll allow time at the end for questions and answers. So I know that most of you already know the core components of Rapid ReHousing. I'm just going to give you a quick recap. Rapid ReHousing is an intervention designed to help individuals and families quickly exit homelessness and return to permanent housing. Rapid ReHousing is offered without preconditions, and the resources and services provided are typically tailored to the unique needs of the household. The core components of Rapid ReHousing include housing identification, rent and move-in assistance, and case management and services. Though Rapid ReHousing must have all three core components available, it's not required that a single program provide all three services or that households utilize all of them. So the Performance Evaluation Improvement Toolkit that we're introducing today is divided into two main content sections. The first section focuses on the three most important benchmarks that Rapid ReHousing programs should use to evaluate effectiveness. These metrics are length of time participants spend homeless, the number of households exiting to permanent housing, and the number of households returning to homelessness after exiting. The toolkit also includes detailed instructions on how to calculate these metrics. The next section of the toolkit discusses how to use these three metrics I just mentioned to improve Rapid ReHousing programs. It goes into detail about how to interpret evaluation results, set performance improvement goals, and develop performance improvement plans, and how to continually review, revise, and refine these strategies regularly. You can download the toolkit for more information from our website. Finally, as you listen to today's webinar and use the toolkit, it's important to remember that performance improvement is not a one-time action. It's a continual process that involves evaluation, setting goals based on evaluation outcomes, and implementing a plan to reach these goals. I will now turn the webinar over to Iain.
Thank you. Can we all see the screen? One moment. All right, show my screen. There we go. Good afternoon, everybody. Thanks to the Alliance for having me on to talk a little bit about rapid rehousing and performance evaluation and figuring out whether or not it's working. As Liza said, happy to take all of your questions that we can at the end. If there's something we didn't get to, the Alliance will get back to you. You can also hit me up on Twitter at OrgCode. As discussed, rapid rehousing is certain things and it is not other things. And I think it's important to remember that if you're going to evaluate anything, you have to start by being in a position of there being apples being able to be compared to apples. So common things I would see in my travels and evaluations of rapid rehousing programs are things like just providing first and last month's assistance, but not doing any of the housing identification or not doing case management services, or agreeing to provide case management supports, but not actually helping the family or the individual gain access to the housing or provide any sort of financial assistance. So the three core components are critical for making sure that you're actually able to compare a rapid rehousing program to another rapid rehousing program if you have more than one within your community, but also if you're looking at the integrity of your own evaluation, if you're just looking at your own program, to make sure that you're actually looking at something called rapid rehousing. Consistency is also going to matter in terms of context, understanding what it means across population groups or providers. So what would rapid rehousing evaluation for, let's say, unaccompanied youth look like compared to families, or veterans compared to non-veteran single adults? Understanding financial resources, so who's doing rapid rehousing based upon what funding source and what does that funding source allow? And then there may be some other local conditions or unique conditions to a specific service provider that need to be considered. Now let's go to the basics. And as Liza indicated, and as the Alliance has laid out within the new toolkit that they've released, there's three basic measures that need to be looked at consistently and well to determine if your rapid rehousing program is working. And those three basic metrics are as follows. How long are people spending homeless? 2, how many are moving into housing? And 3, how many are returning to homelessness? So let's keep it simple and focus just on these three as a starting point. How long are people spending homeless? How many are moving into housing, and that should be permanent housing, and how many are returning to homelessness? Let's go a little bit deeper in breaking each of these down. If you want to look at how long people are spending homeless, remember that it's not just about looking at an average. There is good reason why you would want to look at the mean, median, and perhaps even mode and range to get a sense of what the numbers are really telling you. You could also break it up by population group. So for example, is it taking longer to get large families housed compared to smaller families? Are you able to get youth housed at a rate that's similar or comparable to adults? If you look down by population group, you can sometimes get a sense of what is actually happening relative to the program service delivery, the three core components of rapid rehousing, and the results for those population groups. You also want to perhaps look at the acuity or depth of need. And one of the ways that this can be done is if your community uses the VI SPDAT or comparable tool, you might want to look at whether or not things like, do people with deeper needs take longer, or is there any difference in the length of time it's taking them to get out of homelessness? What else might you look at? Well, if you have the basics down, which would then be augmented by perhaps looking at population groups and acuity, you can start to get a little bit deeper in looking at the data and making sense of the evaluation. So for example, you may want to look at which shelter, outreach provider, or service provider is working with them, so you can have comparative comparisons occurring across different types of organizations providing rapid rehousing. You might want to look at the time of year or season. This is something that can have an impact, particularly in families, relative to the school season in your jurisdiction. The context of the rental market. So what is the vacancy rate, average rents, and how is that playing into the flow-through rate for rapid rehousing? You might also want to look at which resource is being used to make it happen and the sustainability of that resource over the long term. Plus, you might want to look at the race of program participant if you're particularly interested in the cultural and historic practices that are necessary for providing a really informed trauma-based approach to dealing with the issues of homelessness, as well as working, I would say, effectively with different groups within your community relative to having an effective rapid rehousing program. Next up is how many are moving into housing. And we would then look, much like how long people are homeless, on the characteristics of the households or the population groups and get a sense of the volume of people that are moving into permanent housing, perhaps by the population as well as by the number of unique individuals. So for example, if you have a family, that family might be 3 people, 5 people, 10 people. So if you look just beyond households and look at number of people, You can see a larger impact of your rapid rehousing potentially. And then you can, again, look at things like acuity level or depth of need of the people moving into housing. But what else could you look at? If you wanted to go a step further, you might also want to look at things like the household size and or number of bedrooms. Do larger households have a effective rate of moving into housing that's comparable to others? Saturation distribution of where people are getting housed. So you may want to look at specific neighborhoods or buildings where people are moving into housing and get some sense of whether or not a more scattered approach versus a more concentrated approach is getting different results in your rapid rehousing program. You may want to look at whether or not individuals or families are predominantly moving into the primary or corporate rental market versus those that are more likely to move into the secondary rental market, things like rented rooms or floors of houses, which may or may not be advertised or made available in the same way as your corporate rental units. And whether or not people are able to achieve this result without subsidy of moving into housing from an ongoing basis. So depending on your local market conditions, the depth of subsidy and the amount of subsidy to get the individual or family to a place of sustainability, and the income of people exiting, which is a good metric to be aligned with larger initiatives that want to see financial sustainability of the household over time. And then lastly, how many are returning to homelessness? And in this regard, again, you can look at the number of households returning to homelessness by the characteristics of the population group. You might also look at the overall volume of people returning to homelessness, and like the two previous ones, the acuity level or depth of need of those who are returning to homelessness, especially if you're wondering, do people with deeper needs or a more measured or heightened complexity of needs return to homelessness at a greater rate? What else? You may want to look at which organization was supporting them in housing. So perhaps what is really influencing the overall performance is not the depth of need or the size of household, but the organization themselves that's delivering it. You might also want to look at the type of support that was provided and what was their overall framework or operating guidelines or even theories of practice relative to providing supports. How long was the individual or family housed prior to returning to homelessness? You may also want to look at the type of housing that they moved into to see if there's any trends or anything of importance relative to a specific type of housing yielding better or worse results in your rapid rehousing program. Their income source at the time of return to homelessness, which could include whether or not they had any income at all, and where in the community they moved into or out of. In other words, are most of the people that are returning to homelessness people that moved into the same neighborhood or building within your community? Now from there, you could decide to step it up just a notch. And this would be for a more fulsome evaluation to help inform broader practice related to rapid rehousing in your community. Which leads me to this guy. And if you don't know who that is, that's David Lee Roth. Now, I would love to give you the entire history of Van Halen, but I won't for sake of brevity. But the importance of David Lee Roth is the Brown M&M story. When Van Halen was making their way from the Sunset Strip to start doing stadium tours, in the middle of their rider, which was a very thick set of conditions that Van Halen had to play a venue, they wrote that all the brown M&Ms had to be removed backstage. And when they would get to a venue, David would go backstage, and if the brown M&Ms were removed, they would all load in and play the show. If the brown M&Ms were not removed, he would throw a fit in the spirit of a rock diva and insist that entire quality assurance and quality control be done by the road manager or the venue organizer, etc. The point being, even when you step it up a notch, it's better to have a small volume of data that's looked at really intensely that makes sense to you, rather than trying to collect every single factoid or data point under the sun that you would never have the time, interest, inclination, or ability to examine in full depth of detail. Especially if we're thinking about evaluation from a programmatic perspective as opposed to an academic perspective, sometimes you'll get better bang for your buck if you keep things simple and have the ability to do it in-house even when you're stepping it up a notch compared to getting really fancy or having more data than you know what to use. So what? Most of the time when we talk about evaluation and the sort of metrics that are talked about, we focus first on outputs. and that's the volume, the number of households or people that are affected by a rapid rehousing program. But if you wanted to step it up a notch, you'd start to look at outcomes. What difference did any of this make? And if you start looking at outcomes, you come to a different realization relative to the effectiveness of a program compared to just a volume of people served. You might, for example, want to know the outcomes of the experience itself. How do those households that are served, singles and families, feel about the experience? How do funders feel? What do frontline staff feel is happening? And what do landlords have to say? And that's all very different than just knowing the volume of people that are served. Maybe you want to look at impact. If you ask what difference does it make, did your community's approach on rapid rehousing decrease homelessness? And if so, by which population group? Did it decrease the length of shelter stays? Are there fewer people to be rehoused? In other words, are you having a cumulative impact over time? And were there any cost savings elsewhere in the system as a result of doing rapid rehousing? Especially for those households that may have used an inordinate amount of emergency services while they were homeless. Maybe you want to use this as the opportunity to focus on change and changing some things in your community necessary to get better performance overall. Like, what training do we need now that we've looked at our rapid rehousing results and get a sense of the type of support interventions that are working or not working? What might we do differently with our landlord recruitment strategy? Maybe we need to use this information to change the way funders look at the services in our community and what to invest in. And maybe service providers need to do something differently in the process. That's my brief overview of the 3 metrics. And now Liza's going to take the screen back and hand it over to Jerrianne.
Thanks so much, Iain.
Thanks, Iain.
All right, Jerrianne, take it away.
Thanks, Liza. So good afternoon, everyone. My name is Jerrianne Anthony, and I'm with Northern Virginia Family Service, located in Oakton, Virginia. Today I'm going to talk to you a little bit about the concepts that Iain mentioned earlier and how we employed those concepts into our rapid rehousing programs. Just a little bit of information on the shelters that we have. We have one emergency shelter that serves single adults in Fairfax County, Virginia, and 2 shelters in Prince William County, Virginia, which serve families and singles. A little bit on the area in general. The average median income in Prince William County is approximately $97,000, with the average 1-bedroom going for $1,035. And the average median income in Fairfax County is approximately $109,000, with the average 1-bedroom going for about $1,456. So in today's presentation, I hope to be able to talk to you guys a little bit about our rapid rehousing programs, what we've learned, how we've been able to improve our system thus far, and how we hope to improve it moving forward. About a year and a half ago, we attended a National Alliance to End Homelessness conference and heard Iain speak, as well as several other individuals on rapid rehousing. And as a community, we wholeheartedly embraced this concept and really decided to give it a go. So we left the conference, went back home, and decided to get together and embark upon a year-long challenge where we set aggressive goals and really work together to see exactly how many people we would be able to house if we employed these concepts. And so today, I hope to share some of that with you guys. Go to slide 2. So in today's webinar, I'm going to try to cover our rapid rehousing metrics of success, kind of what we thought measured our success and what we did with that. Our outcomes for as far as length of stay, recidivism, satisfaction from the landlords and clients, and I'm going to talk to you a little bit about our evaluation and improvement process throughout the 1-year challenge. So as part of the challenge, you guys can see here, we came up with 4 metrics that we wanted to use to measure our success. One being the length of time homeless. We were trying to measure from a participant's program entry to a participant's program exit, how long were they actually spending in the shelter. Our goal was really to shorten that as much as possible. We looked at number of exits to permanent housing. We pulled our data for the last 2 years and examined how many of those individuals and households we were able to successfully exit to permanent housing. And we used that data to set super aggressive goals, in many cases trying to double the number that we housed 2 years prior. We sought to decrease our recidivism rate. We found when we looked at the data, we did a really good job housing people, but not such a good job helping them to sustain that housing. So we wanted to make sure that whatever program we put in place, whatever tools we decided to use, would help us to effectively reduce our recidivism. And last but not least, is kind of bells and whistles, as Iain referenced. We decided to take a look at our client and landlord satisfaction. We thought if we could get all of those things rolling, they would be great components of a successful rapid rehousing program. Next. So as I stated before, one of our main goals was really to reduce our length of stay. For our single shelter, we were averaging, average length of stay for the year prior was 137 days for singles. And for families were staying in the shelter on average 97 days before being housed. And so we really took a look at our data and tried to see what we could do to reduce our length of stay. The first thing we did was we added rapid rehousing model to our toolkit. Many of our case managers in the past had been case managers for several years, and they come from a place where in the past when a client entered shelter, we believed it was our role as case managers to assess the client, determine what brought them to their homelessness, fix that problem, and then, and only then, would we begin to work on housing. When housing first came along, that kind of flipped that model completely on its head. And so housing first, coupled with rapid rehousing, allowed us to truly rapidly rehouse households as opposed to trying to fix the problem and then placing them in housing. So in order for us to add the rapid rehousing model to our toolkit, we did a few things. We switched our case managers to housing specialists. So we no longer call them case managers, we call them housing specialists. Their job was to focus on housing every single day. Any and everything they did was housing focused. And we really talked to case managers about them. We really tried to recondition their thinking, really tried to help them to understand this shift so that everyone at all times was always focused on housing households. We hired a housing locator, recognizing that at times our landlords were speaking a completely different language than our case managers were speaking. We hired a housing locator who had a housing background, so they had knowledge of tenant rights and responsibilities. They could assist clients and case managers in reading a lease, determining what the lease is saying, what can you do versus what can't you do. They were essential in building, developing, and maintaining relationships with the landlords. And the other thing that we did was we onboarded a community case manager. As I said before, one of the things that we found, we were really good at housing individuals, but maybe 3, 4, 5 months from now, sometimes those individuals will come back. So we hired a community case manager who was very helpful in helping those households sustain housing. Next. We quickly assessed households as they were entering shelter. So it was a year-long challenge. We evaluated ourselves each quarter. Each quarter we took a look at the data. We saw what the data was saying. We tried to come up with ways to decrease the length of stay, looking at the data to increase our exits to permanent housing. Our single shelter was, I'll give you an example, our single shelter was using the VI for that when we initially started. But when we initially started, the assessment wasn't completed until the 3rd case management session. After our first quarter, we took a look at our data and we realized, some households we were able to quickly house within 2 to 3 weeks. And we tried to pull out the data to see what was different about these households versus the households that it took a longer period of time. And what we found was those individuals that we were able to quickly house within 1 week, within 2 weeks, could have theoretically been housed, could have been diverted from even ever entering shelter. And so we also saw that their score on the VIs for that corresponded and said that. And so if we moved our timing up and when we were completing the VIs for that, we would be able to house some of those individuals quicker. We also learned that developing diversion methods and employing them in our intake process would actually prevent that quarter of individuals who were coming and could have been diverted from ever having to enter the shelter. And so we made those necessary tweaks as we went along. Next. We educated clients, staff, and any and everyone who would listen to the rapid rehousing model. We had a conversation with them. In each of our weekly housing meetings, we talked about rapid rehousing. We educated clients on the funding stream, on what it could pay for, what it could not pay for. We educated partners. We ran a hypothermia program at one of our shelters, and so we would educate partners. We partner with faith communities. And so when we had an opportunity, we would tell them, like, we're embarking upon this rapid rehousing experience, and our goal is to really house 150 people by the end of the year. And we talked to them, and we involved them, and we got them to ask questions and figure out how they could be of assistance. One thing that came out of this was after conversing with a stakeholder about our rapid rehousing program, she said, well, hey, are you guys looking for landlords? And we, of course, we're always looking for landlords. So she agreed to put out a call for landlords in the church bulletin. And we were surprised by how many people responded to that, willing to be landlords for the clients that we serve. So we educated the clients, we educated everyone, and got to the point when new clients came in, clients were saying, hey, you need to talk to your housing specialist about the rapid rehousing program. It became a priority for everyone. Next. And again, we use data to inform decisions. So again, every quarter we met, we sat down, we looked at what our length of stay was, how many people we had who had exited to permanent housing, and we thought through what can we do differently, how can we change this model to really get our length of stay down, to really push more people to be exiting into permanent housing. Next. This chart shows our length of stay and how the results went down, and I'm sorry, it looks like the values are not on there. But I had it someplace else, 1 second. So the length of stay for the single shelter went before we began the rapid rehousing challenge. For singles, we were at 137 days. At the end of the year, our average length of stay had gone down to 42 days. For our family shelter, when we began, our length of stay was at 97 days. And over the course of a year, when we ran the results again, we had gotten the length of stay for families from 97 to 47. Next. Exits and recidivism. So again, we found that one of the things that we were great at doing, we could house people, but we were not so good at preventing people from recycling back through the shelter. And so this slide shows our recidivism over the course of the year after the end of the challenge. We, from 62% exited from shelter, only 4% of singles returned to shelter 6 months after their exit from shelter. And for families, 86% exited to permanent housing and 3% returned to the shelter 6 months following their shelter stay. Next. Exits and recidivism. You can, next. So one of the things that we learned when we took a look at exits and recidivism was not one size fits all. We discovered that In the past, we had kind of a cookie-cutter way of placing people into shelter. An individual comes in, we assess them. We're assuming you want a one-bedroom apartment if you're single. If you're a family, you want an apartment that will fit your family's needs. One of the things that we realized was we had to start to think outside of the box. Again, Northern Virginia, our area median income is extremely high, and the average rent for a one-bedroom is over $1,000, which is quite a bit for someone who's on a fixed income. So it required us to think outside of the box. We developed room sharing programs where we had like a game, and we would try to match you up with someone in the shelter that had like similar interests to see if you guys could possibly room together. We encouraged singles to rent basements. We encouraged seniors with fixed incomes to think outside the box and maybe rent a room. We looked at opportunities where individuals could live where they work. We really began to think outside of the box and just not thinking that everyone doesn't need a one-bedroom. It's okay to share a room, to share a basement with someone else while you get yourself back on your feet and become self-sufficient. So we had to accept that not one type of place will work for everyone. Everyone's needs are different, everyone's income is different, and so we had to take those things into consideration. Next. You have to be willing to learn from our mistakes. One of the biggest mistakes I think we made initially was we completely underestimated two things. One, the value of case management after households were housed. That's how we learned probably within the first month or two that even though you house someone, it's only then that the work is really beginning, because once individuals are housed, they no longer have the supports that they had at the shelter. So it's very important that they have some type of support, some type of case management that can link them to resources in the community so that their needs can be met. Because we couldn't be all things for everyone, and we could not provide case management years and years after individuals had left from the shelter. So really realizing how important that case management was after they exited shelter was extremely important. The other thing that we initially did not realize was the importance of a relationship with the landlords. So recognizing that landlords are as much of a stakeholder in this as we are, we found that it was extremely important for us to develop relationships with landlords, but also to nurture those relationships. We wanted to make sure that the landlord felt supported as well. So when there were issues of concern, before the landlord got to the point where they felt like eviction was the only choice, they were calling us and allowing us to work with them to resolve the problem. So really just valuing that relationship with the landlord and really embracing it. Next. Again, recognize the importance of case management. You can't say that enough. Again, when households exit out of shelter, they still need to be connected. They needed to know that there are resources in the community where they could go to get their needs met. They need to know that there is a community that's backing them, that wants to see them being successful. And if obstacles should arise, there's someone that can help to navigate them through those obstacles. Share the love. So we had to recognize that homelessness is not just an organizational issue. It wasn't just an NVFS thing. We really embraced the community as much as possible. Again, when households exited into the community, it was those resources that assisted in sustaining them long term. So developing relationships with faith-based organizations, with food pantries, with any and every social service provider that you can think of that provides a service that your client may need. Taking the time to really meet with them, to explain the program, to learn the eligibility requirements, and then linking clients to those necessary resources before they leave the shelter or as quickly thereafter as possible. Next. Landlord and client and landlord satisfaction surveys. So again, one of the things that we realized pretty early on, I'd say Q1 or Q2, was the true value of having a relationship with the landlord and remaining connected with clients. So we started to do quarterly surveys. We would mail out surveys to both participants as well as landlords, just asking how things are going. What are some of the ways that we can improve our program, our process? We offered incentives to landlords. We sent them Christmas cards. We began to host landlord luncheons. And landlord luncheons were just an opportunity for landlords to come together to learn about different things that were happening in the program. For example, shortly after quarter two, we learned that sometimes there are maintenance repairs that need to be done, and landlords did not necessarily understand that was now their role. But we wanted to maintain the relationship, so we partnered with our faith community, and they developed a maintenance program by which whenever there was a concern with a landlord, say for instance a landlord calls and says, or a client calls and says, you know, I'm having a leak in the faucet is leaking, we would contact the landlord and say, such and such contacted us and said that there is a problem with the sink. Would you mind if our maintenance technician came out to take a look at the kitchen sink? And oftentimes the landlord was very appreciative of that. They were honored to know that we were going to take care of it versus them having to do so. But that also went a long ways in us developing and nurturing that relationship with the landlord. We also developed the landlord luncheons were an opportunity for new landlords to come in to ask questions about the program, to express how they thought we may be able to make the program work better, to discuss any and every issue, concern, suggestion that they had. Landlords were open to come to this monthly luncheon to provide feedback. And last but certainly not least, we developed an aftercare program for our rapid rehousing participants. And this was a monthly occurrence where we just got together on a Saturday with all of the participants who were in rapid rehousing. And it was an opportunity for everyone to come together to partake in a life skills session. Oftentimes we would bring in resources from the community. They would come out and talk about their programs and what their eligibility requirements were. They would sign clients up. Clients would talk about issues of concerns that they were having, be it employment or just socialization. We found this to be extremely helpful for our chronically homeless clients because it provided a sense of community. And so on a monthly basis, they knew there was a place that they could come. They could share any obstacles that they were having. They could talk through any issues. It was an opportunity for them to commune with other individuals. And it was an opportunity for us to provide more case management. So when they were coming out, our staff would commonly check in on them, like, how's it going? Are you having any issues of concerns? An opportunity for them to remain connected so that if there were issues, we knew of those issues up front and could help clients to really strategize and determine how to overcome the obstacles so that they could sustain their housing. So in terms of evaluation and improvement, again, for us, it was an ongoing process. We participated in a year-long challenge. In every quarter, we got together, we talked about lessons learned, what worked, what didn't work, what are some of the other resources that we can pull in to make our program stronger and more successful. We talked about different ways to engage landlords. We talked about any and every component of the program we could possibly think of. And when possible, we made immediate changes to improve those things so that we could carefully evaluate the program moving forward. So again, we used data to propose incremental changes. If there was a tool that was working, moving that tool up in the process, for example, with the VI, for that, it allowed us to quickly assess individuals and know what intervention may be most appropriate for them earlier in the process. We involved our stakeholders, meetings with the faith community, meetings with other resources in the community to develop relationships and begin to see how those resources may be able to assist our clients in sustaining their housing. we have to be willing to learn from mistakes. So when we made a mistake, we quickly discussed it. We came together and discussed how the problem arose, why the problem arose, and what we could do to make it better. We broadened our resource pool. Again, when households exit the shelter and they go into the community, it is very important that they have resources in the community that they can go to meet their needs. And so it was very important for our community case manager and housing specialists to begin to develop those relationships with other resources in the community so that they could provide that assistance to clients when they were in need. That concludes my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jerrianne and Iain. So we have had a lot of really good questions coming in. We have about 19 minutes to get through as many as we can. So one of the questions that we've gotten very frequently that I think both of you can answer, either one, is around measurement period. So if the period of time that you're looking at is too short, then it's hard to really see any sort of trends or get any meaningful information around that data. But if your measurement period is too long, then there isn't always time to, then it might be hard to react in a timely manner and to make appropriate changes as quickly as necessary. So can both of you talk a little bit about how you decide the measurement period for these outcomes when you're looking at rapid rehousing program benchmarks?
I'll start. I think that if you actually set up dashboards on the 3 metrics, you should get those dashboards on a quarterly basis, which essentially are going to give you quarter-over-quarter results. The longer your program goes, you can do year-over-years at the same quarter, and then you can also track funding year-to-date. So I would set those up as a dashboard of data. And the other thing I'd say is that ending homelessness doesn't have a fixed time period, so the more longitudinal your perspective to know if rapid rehousing is working permanently, the better. And so if you're looking at returns to homelessness, that shouldn't just be for a fixed period of time, that should be for a forever period of time.
I agree with Iain. When we initially embarked upon the challenge, we began doing quarterly kind of evaluations to see just how we were doing. And I think that was very important. We've only recently began to, I think in January, we took a look at our 6-month data, 6 months after households had exited the shelter, and then we'll take a look again once we get to 12 months. But I think, as Iain said, once you develop your benchmarks, quarterly check-ins to make sure that you're making progress on those benchmarks, and when you aren't, just really being honest and taking a look at the data to see what's happening, why it's not moving in the right direction that you want it to be moving in, and really making hard decisions to change that.
Thank you. One of the other common questions that we've been receiving is how to increase data literacy of staff, funders, stakeholders, with the understanding that as data is more increasingly used to make program decisions, that it's really important that data is of high quality and is valued by the people who are both inputting it and using it for decisions. So do either of you have any advice on how to make sure that people are valuing data and are data literate when looking at rapid rehousing program evaluation?
You start on this one, Jerrianne.
Yep, no problem. So we do monthly data quality checks, and the data quality checks, it wasn't originally designed, because of rapid rehousing. It was just designed because we wanted to make sure that our data was neat and as clean as possible. But we do monthly VQ sessions, and then again on a quarterly basis as we were going through. This was a challenge to us, so as much as possible we tried to make it fun, because nobody wants to really look at numbers, especially social workers. They don't really want to sit and look at numbers all day. They want to know, what do those numbers translate and how does that impact me and my job and my performance. And so as part of the quarterly meetings that we were having, really taking a look at the data, we were able to even drill down by case managers in some cases to really see, like, how many clients are you able to engage? How many clients did you move from engagement to housing? And so I think when you're able to reach case managers or data persons on that level, and they are able to connect to the data, you have a better chance of them really understanding and beginning to see it's important that my data is accurate, because they are looking at the data, and that data is translating into policies and the way that we're doing business. So I would just say, like, really involving and engaging the case management staff, the data quality, whoever's entering your data, so that they begin to understand that you're using it to really inform decision making.
I'd add, being it simple is the best way to go. You don't need, you know, if you have a whole bunch of professional evaluators involved all the time, you'll lose the acceptability or the ease with which it's understood. And that's not to take away things from professional evaluators and people who do this for a living, but you need the data to be accessible. And simple is the best way to do it. A small number of metrics done really well is going to get you much better than a large volume of metrics that people can never fully comprehend or input. And I would also really encourage communities to visualize their data, even with just simple charts that you can do out of Excel, because people will gravitate towards an understanding of that a lot quicker.
Great, thank you. So one of the other common issues that has been coming up in rapid rehousing program evaluation is how domestic violence providers can engage in program evaluation, given that they do not participate in HMIS and therefore have different limitations than other programs. Jerrianne, I know that Northern Virginia Family Services is not specifically a domestic violence provider, but if either of you have thoughts on how a provider without HMIS could engage in effective rapid rehousing program evaluation as rapid rehousing becomes increasingly common for CED survivors.
Well, I'll start on this one. Many, if not most, states that offer DV-funded shelters have a data system of some sort that's required amongst the DV providers. And so if the survivors of domestic violence have had a repeat trauma and return to a DV provider, there would be a way of understanding their return to homelessness. All the other metrics would remain intact, especially if they're providing the case management services, so understanding size of household and how many are actually moving into permanent housing and then how many come back, then closed system. And I think it might be possible, worthy of examination, if in those closed systems that have unique identifiers without sharing information, if you could actually run a report based upon unique identifiers of people coming back in.
Great, thank you. And Iain, this might be, again, a question for you. We've had a few questions around how you gather data in very large areas where transience is very common, and it's hard to keep in touch with clients after they leave a program, and it's hard to measure return to homelessness. Do you have suggestions for how returns to homelessness can be measured effectively?
Well, the simplest way, although an incomplete way, but at least a barometer, is to get a sense of those that were exited from a program, how many showed up as a new entry or showed up seeking homeless services again as tracked through your HMIS. And so you could see just based upon that. So it wouldn't be 100% capture, but it would be indicative, or at least a barometer, of those people that are returning back to homeless services in larger geographic areas, especially rural and even remote, and some suburban that rely a lot on like a 2-on-1 type service. You could also be tracking caller IDs and getting a sense of who's calling for services and a return, so that could be helpful. And then you could think of low budget ways that, again, are not going to give you 100% capture, but you could round this out a bit more. Let's say once a year you send a pre-stamped letter or postcard to previous participants, because you should know their address, and get a sense of the volume of those that come back. And again, it wouldn't be 100% complete, but what you would know is if there's a return to sender, because the person is no longer at that address, at least they're no longer at that address. So you would know full completion rate, but you would have some sense of return to sender, which maybe the household moved to a different location, but maybe they returned to homelessness, but you'd at least be able to verify in some sense a greater volume of those with the surety that are still housed.
Great, thank you. And Jerrianne, we have had a lot of questions about the strategies that Northern Virginia Family Services uses to better engage landlords. I know you talked about the landlord luncheons that you do. Are there any other strategies that you have seen have been particularly effective in improving your rapid rehousing program?
We were quite amazed at the response that we got when we, one of our hypothermia providers decided to put it in their church bulletin. And we got a large number of landlords that actually began to contact us after that, willing to do so. So I would say some of the other things that we've done, we've done church bulletin announcements. We've also gone to realtors meetings and just talked about our program. We've done postcards and asked current landlords to provide them to friends or who have properties that they may be willing to rent out to our clients. We've gone to associations and spoke to the clients. So I would just say, not clients, the landlords. Any and every opportunity is possible where you have a chance or an opportunity to really sell your rapid rehousing program. We developed a brochure that kind of talked about the program that we did. I think the maintenance program was very helpful in getting landlords to come on board. Landlords, what we found, want to know as much as possible that they're not embarking upon this themselves. And so when possible, we try to not sell the person, we're trying to sell them the program. We're trying to let them know that we'd like for you to give this client an opportunity, but in order to make this a successful venture, we are willing to do, we'll do monthly check-ins. We have this maintenance program, so should minor repairs happen within your household, you can call upon us and we'll come out, we'll send someone out to repair those things. So really developing a program and really trying to sell that program to landlords. And what we found is when done correctly, like we have landlords, when someone vacates their property, they're calling us and saying, hey, we have a property that's vacated. Do you have someone for that property?
I just want to add one more piece of the strategy. Love what Jerrianne said, which is don't underestimate the importance of a whole bunch of landlords that are likely existing in your community right now who are not advertising and engaged in historic ways. And so what I mean by that is almost every individual and family who has the exact same characteristics as the individual or family in your rapid rehousing program that you're trying to get housed has found housing on their own. So independent of your organization, independent of any government assistance. And the only way to find many of those landlords is boots on the ground intelligence. You want to look at mapping of census data, low-income neighborhoods in your community that doesn't have a whole lot of federally assisted units. You want to go out, and you don't want to talk to landlords to start, you want to talk to tenants. And I'm paraphrasing, but essentially the question you need to ask the tenants in those neighborhoods is, how did you find this housing without us? And if you can figure that out and replicate it, you'll get a volume of units available, not through slumlords, but through a secondary market or non-corporatized approach to renting housing that will free up many more units than you thought existed.
I echo what Iain said. A lot of times we also found that once we educated the clients on the program, they had no problems going out there and locating housing. It was just a matter of us speaking to the landlord and then getting the paperwork signed. But once we gave them the tools, we talked to them about the program, they were very successful getting on Craigslist or going out there and finding private landlords to rent to them.
Thank you. We're also seeing several questions about measuring the length of time that people spend homeless. So some programs might have various points of contact with which participants can come into the program. They might first contact the program through an outreach worker or maybe through a case manager. And so how do you decide what is the start date for program contact when there might be different ways for participants to enter one single program?
what you need to do is have, go ahead,
Okay.
Jerrianne.
No, go ahead, Ian.
I'd say you need as a community to have standards relative to how you're going to measure that, as opposed to having different providers measuring it in different ways. And the advice we always give is the oldest known verifiable record, so verifiable, is going to be necessary as the starting position. That doesn't matter if it's outreach, shelter, going to maybe a food pantry that's on HMIS. Some communities, the rare, have different churches that may be engaged in delivery services where people have gone for assistance before they touch the nonprofit world or the government world. So oldest known verifiable record based upon a common community understanding and definition of what that means.
Jerrianne, did you have something to add or no?
No, agree.
Okay, great. We have just a couple more minutes, so I'll try to get one more question in. For a community that might not have any programs that are meeting the benchmarks that have been outlined, can you describe what might be a way to start setting performance goals, to make performance improvement plans that programs can work towards, even if they're not quite meeting the benchmarks that have been outlined as successful?
I would say a great place to start is by looking at old data. So if you're not currently meeting the benchmarks right now, just taking a look at how you did on those measures before, like what's the average length of stay for participants in your programs now? How many clients exited shelters within the last year? And then really taking a look at that data, making a guess or a bold claim of where you'd like to see those performance measures go. Would you like to see the length of time homelessness decrease to? How many people would you like to see exited to permanent housing within a given period of time? And then working towards those goals, taking a look at your systems to see, do you have what you need to really make that happen? And if you don't, what are some of the ways that you're going to work around that, or work to get those things that you need to really move towards hitting those outcomes? So I think it's very important that people look at the old data that they have and then work from that to make informed decisions about what your goals will be moving forward.
In addition to the context and data that you start with on the targets that you're setting, which I think are all really good ideas, you know, I would say to everybody listening on the webinar and everybody who has a community does know where to start, remind yourselves of this. There are only 3 types of people that will ever experience homelessness. There are someone's parent, someone's sibling, or someone's child. And if you want to figure out how to go about ending homelessness, start with one person at a time.
Thank you. That is a great note to end on, Ian. Thank you, Ian and Jerrianne, both so much for your presentations and your participation in today's webinar. Thank you, everyone who attended. These presentations, along with a recording of the webinar, will be available on our website approximately within the next 24 hours, as well as the Rapid ReHousing Performance Evaluation and Improvement Toolkit, which can currently be downloaded at our website. Thank you all for your participation, and we hope to see you on our next Rapid ReHousing webinar.